Since the release of Lightfall, it seems like Titans have been getting nothing but nerfs, but Warlocks have been nothing but flourishing. From Heart of Inmost to Synthos getting nerfed and Warlocks just being untouched, it's been much harder to be a Titan main in these recent days. This is what all my Titan main friends say. Honestly, this season with the artifact mods, I've been having such a great time on Titan. It hurts me to say that as a Warlock main. So in today's video, I wanted to show you guys this build that absolutely tanks while also nuking enemies. Alright, getting straight into this build, the first thing we're going to go over is the exotic of choice. That is going to be Heart of Inmost Light. Now, even after the nerf in Lightfall to Hoil is still one of the strongest options for Titan, especially if paired properly with the new mod system. Although, because of the nerf to Heart of Inmost, where you only have 5 seconds instead of 10 seconds for the Empower buff, you'll have to be much smarter with your ability usage. But we can help mitigate this with some armor mods that we will be using in this build. Alright, so that being said, let's get into our subclass. So starting out, we're going to be using Void Titan. The reason for this is because there's a lot of artifact mods this season that benefit Void. Because of this, we are able to build into Void and make it an absurdly strong subclass. Now, this will not be limited to Season 20, as there are things you can do to make it just as strong as it is currently in Season 20. And I will go to that when we get there. So starting out for the super, we're going to be using Bubble for most activities. So a small little tip that many people do not know about that my friend told me is that every time you pop your Bubble, you will get full grenade energy. With that information, you should be throwing your grenade every time before you pop Bubble. For our abilities, we're going to be using the Rally Barricade, the Throwing Shield, and scatter grenades. Now, the reason for Rally Barricade is just because it has a shorter cooldown than Towering Barricade. The Throwing Shield, the reason for this is because you don't have to be close to enemies to use it. Along with that, it also has a shorter cooldown than Shoulder Charge. Lastly, for scatter grenades, the reason for this is because it is the shortest cooldown of almost all the Void nades, with the only exception being magnetic grenades, where it has the same cooldown time. Along with this, it is also one of the highest DPS grenades for Void. Because these are the abilities with some of the lowest cooldowns, this also allows for very easy spam with all your abilities in Hoil. Going into our aspects, the first one we're going to be talking about is going to be Offensive Bulwark, as what this does is whenever you have an overshield, which is either going to be by sitting inside your bubble or throwing your little throwy shield at an enemy and hitting them, you'll basically get increased grenade energy recharge rate. Along with this, your melee range and damage is greatly increased. Now, for our second aspect, we're going to be using Control Demolitionist, as what this does is whenever you hit an enemy with a Void ability and or make volatile on them, it'll spread that volatile to other enemies. Now, whenever you shoot them enough, it'll cause the volatile explosion, which for the strongest part of this build, when you get that volatile explosion, will grant you health to you and your allies, so not just you. This aspect is going to be the strongest part of this build, as we have Volatile Flow in our artifact this season. With Volatile Flow and Controlled Demo, you'll basically just be getting free heals for shooting enemies, which makes it very strong for this season. And there's a way you can replicate this in future seasons that I'll get to later. Next up, let's get into the fragments. First up, we're going to have the Echo of Undermining. Now, Echo of Undermining should just be ran on all Void builds, as all it does is it applies a 15% debuff to enemies when you hit them with your Void nade. This is at the cost of 20 discipline, but it is worth the trade-off. Second up, we're going to be going to Echo of Starvation, as what this does is it gives you Devour whenever you pick up a Void Breach or an Orb of Power, which this build will be doing a lot of both. So the reason we use Devour here is because what Devour does is whenever you get kills, it extends the duration of Devour. Along with that, it also instantly heals you and gives you a little bit of your grenade energy per kill. So because of this, because Echo Starvation does have a -10 recovery, it doesn't really matter considering you will be getting heals just for killing enemies. And maybe if you're not getting kills as quickly as enemies are doing damage to you, it won't matter because you have Controlled Demolitionist healing you when you have volatile rounds. For our third fragment, we're going to be running Echo of Cessation, as what this does is whenever you get a finisher final blow, it makes enemies nearby you volatile, but the biggest part about this thing is that whenever you get volatile kills, it'll create a Void Breach on that enemy, which then feeds into the fact that whenever you get a Void Breach, you'll get Devour. Not only that, but in the next season, we're going to get a new armor mod that basically makes it so whenever you collect a thing associated with your subclass, in this case, it would be Void Breaches, there's an escalating chance that you'll get an armor charge from picking it up. Now, for our last fragment, we have Echo of Exchange. Now, this last fragment is kind of a little bit more for lower end content. I would say no harder than Legend. And what this basically does is makes it so whenever you get a melee final blow, it'll basically give you a bit of grenade energy. Now, for when you are in that Legend content or lower, it's going to be very strong for allowing you to get your abilities back so you can Hoil spam faster. So like I said earlier, there are ways that you can make this build future proof, aka not limited to the artifact. In this case, we're talking about Volatile Flow in this season's artifact. But the way I would make this build stronger for future seasons is going to be by putting on, instead of Echo of Exchange, I would be rocking the Echo of Instability, as what this does is that whenever you get a grenade final blow, it'll give you volatile rounds. But like I said, I would only rock this in future seasons when we do not have Volatile Flow. And with that change, the only thing we would be losing is going to be the fact that we will not be getting grenade energy on melee kills. Next up, let's get into our armor mods. Now, before we get into the armor mods, I recommend unlocking from the artifact the authorized mod for void and grenades. This will basically allow you to put on armor mods for cheaper for certain things. With that being said, let's get straight into the helmet. Starting out, for the helmet, I'm rocking Acid to Assets, Void Siphon, and Font of Wisdom, but can be easily replaced by Heavy Ammo Finder. So what Acid to Assets does is it basically gives you bonus super energy for every grenade kill that you get, making it so you can get your super back very quickly. I run Void Siphon for the ability to create orbs on rapid void weapon final blows, and I run Font of Wisdom purely because I'm already running Armor Decay mods, and I have the extra slot, and I don't feel like I run out of heavy ammo that often, so I run it for the extra 30 intellect. Now for my gauntlets, I run Momentum Transfer for the ability that my grenades reduce my melee cooldown whenever they hit the target and do damage to them. Secondly, I run Bolstering Detonation for class ability energy whenever I'm doing damage with my grenade. Lastly, I run a Firepower mod, so that way I create a Orb of Power on my grenade final blows. A Momentum Transfer and Bolting Destination basically makes it so I'm able to feed into my ability spam harder with Hoil. Now for my chest piece, the only thing of note that I'm running here is going to be one charged up mod for the one extra armor charge slot. And my other two are just Concussive Dampener and Harmonic Resist, because that's all I have room for. Now for my boots, I run a Stacks on Stacks, so that way every time I pick up an Orb of Power, I get one extra armor charge for each orb I pick up. Secondly, on my legs, I like to run Innervation, so that way every time I pick up an Orb of Power, I get a little bit of my grenade cooldown reduced. Now lastly, I run one Void Weapon Surge, just because I like the extra 10% damage I get while being armor charged. But this can easily be replaced out by any scavenger mod for your heavy weapons. Lastly, we're going to be going over the mark, and what I'm running on the mark is going to be a bomber mod, so every time I place my barricade, it'll give me a little bit of my grenade energy back. Along with this, I am running one time dilation to make my armor charge last a little bit longer, so my surge mod and my wisdom mod last just a little bit longer. Lastly, I am running a Reaper mod, so every time I place my class ability down, it creates an orb for the next weapon final blow I get. So what this is built towards is that this is supposed to let you get your abilities off of your other abilities, whether it be Bolstering Detonation, allowing you to get your class ability back just by using your grenade to damage an enemy, or your barricade, whenever you place it, give you a little bit of your grenade energy back. So this will just basically make up for a little bit of what the Hoil nerf did. So some weapons I would recommend pairing with this build is just going to be obviously void weapons, so your things like your Unforgivens from Duality or your Funnel Webs, which is just a world drop. Other weapons that you can pair with this are going to be things like Harsh Language with Repulsor Brace or Hollow Denial with Repulsor Brace, so that way every time you get a kill with volatile rounds, it'll give you an overshield. We also cannot leave out that probably one of the strongest weapons this season is going to be the Wave Splitter. Because what this weapon allows you to do is every time you pick up an orb, it basically gives you the maximum amount of damage with it. As what the exotic trait of this weapon does is that it basically allows you to pick up an orb of power to gain the maximum amount of damage that you'll be able to do with the weapon for a short duration. So every single time you pick up an orb of power, you'll be doing the maximum amount of damage with this weapon. Along with that, you'll also be getting volatile rounds, making this weapon a very deadly gun. Now for heavy weapons that you can pair with this, I would recommend either running something like your Commemoration or your Corrective Measure, as these are both void, but I would argue that Commemoration is just better because it has some great combinations like Recombination along with Killing Tally. But if you had a pair of rocket launcher with this setup, I would recommend using the Red Herring because you can get a pretty decent roll of Field Prep and Frenzy. Along with that, it's also just one of the easiest void rocket launchers in the game to obtain. With all that being said, I think that's going to be the end of this video, and if I missed anything, I'll leave it in the pinned comment. I will also leave the link to the dim build in the pinned comment as well. Thank you.